Racist cop curses black woman, not knowing her encrypted clearance lets her dismantle his unit without consent. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to the main character. Naomi Carter stood just inside the municipal police building as the automatic doors slid shut behind her with a muted hiss. The late afternoon sun falling away from the glass and leaving her under the steady glow of fluorescent lights that never seemed to blink. She carried no badge on a lanyard, no visible credentials, just a slim tablet secured in a charcoal sleeve and a phone whose screen remained dark, as if asleep, as if waiting. Naomi moved with the unhurried calm of someone accustomed to being underestimated, her posture straight, her steps measured, her eyes attentive without appearing curious. Around her, the building hummed with routine sounds, keyboards tapping, radios murmuring, boots crossing tile floors measured in feet and inches that echoed through hallways built decades ago. It was a place that prided itself on order, a place where authority often spoke louder than facts, and Naomi had learned long ago that silence could be the sharpest instrument of all. As she approached the front desk, a uniformed officer glanced up, then looked past her, then back again, confusion briefly flickering before hardening into dismissal. He called for Officer Daniel Mercer, whose reputation traveled faster than his footsteps. Mercer arrived with an air of certainty that filled the space, his voice confident, his assumptions already formed. He spoke before listening, his words clipped, his tone edged with impatience, as if the presence of a black woman without obvious credentials disrupted the balance he believed he controlled. Naomi did not interrupt him. She did not explain. She did not argue. She simply waited, allowing the moment to reveal more about him than about her. The lobby felt colder as his remarks landed and lingered, not because of what was said, but because of how easily it was said, how practiced it sounded, how comfortable. Naomi's gaze drifted briefly to a wall-mounted clock ticking seconds into minutes, then to a hallway marked authorized personnel only, then back to Mercer, who seemed certain the building itself would side with him. What he did not notice was the subtle motion of Naomi's thumb brushing the edge of her phone, a habit rather than an action, a reminder rather than a signal. She listened as he cited policy, as he gestured toward exits measured in yards from where they stood, as he spoke of consent as though it were something he could grant or deny at will. Naomi absorbed it all, filing details away with the same precision she used to track dates, times, and system logs. Somewhere above them, on the fourth floor, servers cooled behind locked doors, humming steadily, counting everything, forgetting nothing. Naomi's tablet remained closed, yet her presence alone had already begun to ripple outward through systems designed to respond to keys that could not be seen. She thought about how authority often announced itself loudly, while accountability arrived quietly, how the most effective changes rarely needed permission from those most threatened by them. As Mercer finished, expecting compliance, Naomi finally lifted her eyes to meet his, not with challenge, but with clarity, and in that calm exchange, the balance began to shift, not through force, not through spectacle, but through an unseen architecture of access and oversight that had already been set in motion, waiting for the right moment to speak for her. The building settled into its usual rhythm as the afternoon wore on, a rhythm Naomi Carter understood well enough to predict without looking. Phones rang at measured intervals, printers hummed softly, and somewhere down a corridor a door opened and closed with a sound so familiar it blended into the background. From the outside, the precinct appeared calm, efficient, even orderly, but beneath that surface lived habits that had hardened over years, habits that rarely questioned themselves. Naomi took a seat on a molded plastic chair near the lobby wall, positioned beneath a framed mission statement printed in bold letters about service and integrity. She read it once, then looked away, not out of cynicism, but out of familiarity with the gap between words and practice. Officer Daniel Mercer remained nearby, speaking to another officer in a low voice, his posture relaxed, his confidence unshaken. To him, the moment had already passed. The woman had been addressed, corrected, and placed exactly where he believed she belonged. Naomi noticed how easily the space seemed to agree with him, how no one asked questions, how no one wondered why she had arrived unannounced, or why she appeared entirely unconcerned with being told to wait. She rested the tablet on her lap without opening it, her hands still, her breathing slow. Time, she knew, was often the deciding factor in moments like these. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Officers came and went, some casting quick glances her way, others ignoring her completely. A younger officer paused once, hesitated as if considering whether to ask if she needed assistance, then thought better of it, and continued down the hall. Naomi did not react. She was listening, not just to conversations, but to the building itself, to the subtle cues that revealed how authority flowed and where it collected. Somewhere above, data moved faster than footsteps, records updating quietly, timestamps aligning. Naomi's phone vibrated once, softly, almost imperceptibly, a notification that did not light the screen. She acknowledged it with the smallest shift of her fingers and nothing more. Mercer eventually returned to his desk, his earlier irritation replaced by indifference. He believed the situation resolved, his role completed. Naomi observed how quickly certainty settled back into place, how systems designed to resist scrutiny often mistook silence for submission. She thought about previous visits to buildings like this across different states, different cities measured in miles and square blocks, all sharing the same architecture of confidence. The waiting area clock ticked forward, its second hand tracing the same circle again and again, marking progress no one else seemed to notice. A supervisor walked past, glanced briefly at Naomi, then continued without comment. Naomi met his eyes for half a second, not challenging, not pleading, simply present. That presence lingered longer than he expected, though he did not yet understand why. Naomi reflected on the word consent, how often it was invoked selectively, applied downward, but rarely upward. She had learned early in her career that some forms of authority did not announce themselves with raised voices or visible symbols. Some operated quietly, embedded within protocols and clearances that required no permission from those accustomed to granting it. The tablet on her lap contained nothing remarkable at first glance. No logos, no seals, just a dark screen reflecting the overhead lights. Yet the access it represented extended far beyond this room, beyond this department, into systems designed to watch the watchers. Naomi allowed herself a single slow breath, grounding herself in the certainty that timing mattered more than confrontation. When the moment came, it would arrive without warning, not with alarms or arguments, but with routine notices and locked access points, with emails that could not be ignored and directives that did not ask for approval. For now, she waited, blending into the background she had been trained to navigate, letting the precinct continue as it always had, unaware that its ordinary afternoon was already being recorded, indexed, and quietly prepared for review. By early evening, the light outside the precinct shifted, stretching long shadows across the parking lot measured in rows and marked spaces, while inside the building the pace subtly changed. Officers prepared for shift transitions, reports were finalized, and the low murmur of routine took on a tired edge. Naomi Carter remained seated, unnoticed in a way that was almost intentional, as if the building itself had decided she was part of the furniture. She observed Officer Daniel Mercer from a distance as he joked lightly with a colleague, his earlier irritation replaced by the easy confidence of someone who believed the day was proceeding exactly as expected. Naomi understood that confidence well. She had encountered it in offices across the country, from coastal cities to inland towns separated by hundreds of miles, always wearing the same expression of certainty. Her phone vibrated again, slightly stronger this time, though still discreet. Naomi glanced down briefly, her eyes scanning a short message composed in neutral language, the kind designed to be read without drawing attention. She did not respond. There was nothing to add. The process had already begun, moving through layers that did not require her constant input. A sergeant passed by and paused, his gaze settling on Naomi with a flicker of curiosity. He asked the front desk officer a quiet question, received a vague answer, and nodded, satisfied enough to move on. Naomi noted the exchange, the way uncertainty dissolved when no one felt responsible for resolving it. She adjusted her posture slightly, crossing one ankle over the other, her movements unremarkable. In her mind, timelines aligned, not in minutes, but in sequences. She thought about how long it took for information to travel through institutional channels, how delays were often mistaken for obstacles. Naomi had built her career on understanding those delays, on knowing when to wait and when to act. Across the room, a computer terminal refreshed, its screen momentarily flickering as background updates completed. Naomi's tablet remained closed, but she was keenly aware of the network activity it mirrored, of permissions granted long before she walked through those doors. Mercer received a call and stepped away, his voice low, his demeanor unchanged. He spoke about dinner plans, about traffic measured in miles per hour, about mundane details that grounded him in the belief that nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Naomi recognized that belief as a shield. She had learned that systems rarely reacted to warnings, only to confirmations. Somewhere beyond the precinct, emails were being routed, access logs reviewed, patterns quietly compared. Naomi's role was not to confront, but to observe, to ensure the record remained intact. She reflected on how authority often mistook patience for weakness, how silence was frequently misread as compliance. The clock above the mission statement continued its steady progress, the second hand ticking forward with mechanical certainty. Naomi counted none of it. Her sense of time was broader, shaped by outcomes rather than moments. A supervisor's phone rang, his expression shifting subtly as he listened, his posture straightening as if responding to an unspoken cue. He ended the call without comment, glanced around the room, and made a note on a pad he kept tucked under his arm. Naomi noticed that too. Small signs mattered. The building felt no different, yet something beneath its routine had begun to tighten, like a system running a diagnostic in the background. Naomi allowed herself a quiet certainty. She had not come to be heard. She had come to be recorded. When the next phase unfolded, it would do so through official channels, through procedures and protocols that could not be brushed aside. For now, she remained where she was, a calm presence in a familiar space, letting the precinct move forward unaware that its ordinary evening was being measured against standards it had not considered in years, standards that did not announce themselves, but arrived all the same, precise and unavoidable. The shift change brought a subtle tension into the precinct, the kind that never appeared on schedules but could be felt in. The way voices lowered and footsteps slowed. Naomi Carter sensed it immediately, the air growing heavier as routine gave way to review. Officer Daniel Mercer noticed it too, though he interpreted it differently, assuming it was nothing more than administrative friction, the usual end-of-day adjustments that came and went without consequence. He passed near the lobby again, glancing briefly at Naomi with a look that suggested mild annoyance rather than concern, as if her continued presence challenged his assumption that he had already resolved the matter. Naomi met his glance calmly, and then looked away, offering no reaction for him to measure himself against. A lieutenant approached the front desk with a printed notice in hand, his brow furrowed as he scanned the page. He asked a quiet question about system access delays, his tone professional but strained. The desk officer shrugged, offering no explanation. Naomi observed the exchange without moving, aware that the first signs of disruption rarely announced themselves clearly. Across the room, a printer paused mid-task and then resumed, its brief silence drawing a few confused looks. Mercer frowned and checked his terminal, refreshing his screen once, then again, assuming a temporary glitch. Naomi's phone vibrated a third time, longer than before, the signal unmistakable now. She did not read it immediately. She already knew what it would say. Her focus remained outward, attentive to the way uncertainty began to ripple through the room. Officers exchanged brief comments about slow connections, about files that took longer than usual to load, about permissions that suddenly required additional verification. None of it felt urgent yet, but the rhythm of confidence had begun to falter. Mercer's irritation returned, sharper this time, directed at the system rather than at Naomi. He muttered about inefficiency, about bureaucracy interfering with real work. Naomi listened, noting how quickly blame shifted away from those accustomed to holding control. A supervisor raised his voice slightly, asking everyone to remain patient while technical issues were addressed. Naomi finally glanced at her phone, her eyes scanning the message with practiced efficiency. The words were minimal, precise, confirming what she had already anticipated. Initial reviews had flagged discrepancies. Oversight protocols were active. No action was required from her at this stage. She locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Mercer attempted to access a report and froze when the screen displayed a message requesting higher-level authorization. He tried again, his jaw tightening. Nearby officers experienced similar interruptions, their expressions shifting from annoyance to confusion. The building had not changed, yet the sense of control within it was clearly slipping. Naomi remained seated, her posture unchanged, as if insulated from the unease spreading around her. She reflected on how systems revealed their true priorities under pressure, how accountability often arrived disguised as inconvenience. A captain emerged from an office, his demeanor alert now, his eyes scanning the room as he took in the subtle signs of disruption. He made a quick call, stepping aside to speak in hushed tones. Naomi recognized the posture, the careful choice of words, the instinct to gather information before reacting. Mercer watched him with growing concern, his confidence thinning as he realized this was not a routine delay. Naomi felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph. This was not about personal vindication. It was about structure correcting itself, about processes finally aligning with standards long documented but rarely enforced. The lobby clock continued its steady movement, marking time without judgment. Naomi understood that the most significant changes often unfolded quietly, through locked fields and redirected access rather than confrontations. When the captain ended his call, his expression was noticeably different, focused, measured. He began issuing instructions, asking for certain systems to be left untouched, for certain reports to be preserved exactly as they were. Mercer listened, his unease deepening as he realized this moment was no longer under his control. Naomi stood at last, not abruptly, but with deliberate calm, adjusting the tablet in her hands. She did not approach anyone or speak. She simply took a few steps toward the exit, her presence briefly registering now that the atmosphere had shifted. As she passed Mercer, he looked at her again, this time with uncertainty rather than dismissal, sensing too late that her silence had never meant submission. Naomi exited the building as the door slid closed behind her, leaving the precinct buzzing with questions that had no immediate answers, questions that would soon be addressed through channels far beyond that lobby, guided not by raised voices, but by records, reviews, and a standard of accountability that did not ask for consent. The following morning arrived with a stillness that felt deliberate, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted from confusion to quiet vigilance, the kind that followed unanswered questions. Officer Daniel Mercer arrived early, his uniform pressed, his movements tighter than usual. He logged in at his terminal and waited longer than expected for access to load, watching a progress indicator inch forward before stopping altogether. Around him, other officers experienced the same delays, their casual remarks from the night before replaced by focused silence. A notice appeared on several screens requesting that all personnel refrain from modifying reports or deleting files until further instruction. No explanation accompanied it. Mercer read the message twice, irritation tightening his jaw. He prided himself on efficiency, on control, and this interruption felt like an intrusion into territory he believed he understood. A captain addressed the unit briefly, his words careful, emphasizing cooperation and patience while external reviews were conducted. The phrase external reviews lingered in the air longer than intended. Mercer noticed how no one met his eyes, how conversations stopped when supervisors passed. He thought back to the woman from the lobby, Naomi Carter, her calm demeanor, her refusal to engage. At the time, he had dismissed her as irrelevant. Now, her presence replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Across town, Naomi sat at a small table in a quiet cafe, steam rising from a mug she barely touched. Her tablet was open now, displaying lines of text and status indicators that updated methodically. She read through them without visible reaction, noting timestamps, cross-references, and confirmations. The process was unfolding as designed, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Naomi understood that oversight rarely announced itself with fanfare. It arrived through checklists, audits, and quiet requests for clarification that grew more pointed with each response. She reviewed a summary noting restricted access at the precinct, preservation orders issued, and a request for supervisory interviews scheduled in the coming days. Naomi closed the tablet and slipped it into her bag, her role shifting from observer to verifier. Back at the precinct, Mercer attempted to retrieve a past incident report and encountered a notice stating the file was temporarily unavailable pending review. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the room, noticing similar frustrations reflected on other faces. A sergeant whispered to a colleague about federal involvement, the word federal spoken softly, as if volume alone might attract attention. Mercer felt a tightening in his chest, not fear, but the unsettling realization that the usual rules no longer applied. He approached a supervisor, asking for clarification, only to receive a measured response advising him to focus on current duties. The lack of detail spoke louder than any explanation. Naomi returned to the building later that afternoon, this time entering through a different door, one reserved for authorized visitors. She signed in without ceremony, her name entered into a system that now recognized it instantly. An administrator escorted her down a hallway she had passed before, the fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors measured in long strides. Naomi observed the subtle changes, the increased formality, the careful politeness. She was shown to a small conference room and asked to wait. She did so without comment. Mercer passed the room moments later and saw her through the glass, seated calmly, reviewing a document. Recognition struck him then, sharp and undeniable. The woman he had dismissed was now positioned at the center of the disruption he could not escape. He slowed his steps, uncertainty replacing confidence. Naomi looked up briefly, her expression neutral, acknowledging him without judgment. That brief exchange clarified what explanations could not. This was no personal vendetta, no impulsive intervention. It was a process that had been set in motion long before either of them arrived that day. As Mercer continued down the hall, the weight of that realization settled in. Authority, he understood now, was not always visible. Sometimes it moved quietly, guided by standards and clearances beyond local reach. Naomi returned her attention to the document, prepared to ensure the review remained factual, complete, and insulated from influence. The precinct continued its operations, but the foundation beneath it was being measured against criteria it had long assumed did not apply. In that measured silence, accountability took shape, not as an accusation, but as an inevitable outcome of systems finally looking at themselves without distraction. The review entered a new phase without announcement, unfolding through calendars and inboxes rather than sirens or speeches. Naomi Carter arrived at the conference room early, placing her bag neatly beside the chair and setting her tablet on the table with deliberate care. The room was small, measured in a few yards from wall to wall, neutral in color, designed to discourage emotion. Through the glass, the precinct moved with careful restraint, officers speaking softly, supervisors tracking schedules with an intensity that suggested awareness rather than Understanding. Naomi read the agenda once and memorized it, noting how each item aligned with steps already completed elsewhere. When the first supervisor entered, he greeted her formally, addressing her by name and title without being prompted, a change that did not go unnoticed. Naomi acknowledged him with a brief nod, her expression composed. One by one, department representatives joined, each carrying a folder, each careful to sit where directed. Officer Daniel Mercer was among the last to arrive. He took a seat near the end of the table, posture rigid, eyes fixed forward. He recognized the document headers immediately, the standardized formatting that signaled oversight beyond municipal authority. Naomi observed him quietly, recalling his certainty from days earlier. The way he had assumed control was synonymous with permission. The meeting proceeded methodically. Questions were asked in plain language, answers requested without accusation. Naomi spoke only when necessary, clarifying timelines, confirming access parameters, ensuring the record reflected sequence rather than speculation. Her voice was steady, neither cold nor warm, calibrated to be precise. Mercer listened, his unease deepening as references surfaced to systems he had never accessed, reviews he had not anticipated. At one point, a supervisor hesitated before asking Naomi to confirm her clearance scope. Naomi did so succinctly, citing the authority without elaboration, noting the encrypted nature of her credentials and the protocols governing their use. The room absorbed the information in silence. No one challenged it. They did not need to. The implications were sufficient. As the meeting concluded, directives were issued to preserve materials, to suspend discretionary actions, to cooperate fully with scheduled interviews. Naomi gathered her tablet and stood, her role in this phase complete. Outside the room, Mercer paused, then approached her, stopping a respectful distance away. He did not apologize or accuse. He asked a single question, measured and cautious, about when the review would conclude. Naomi met his gaze evenly and replied that timelines were determined by findings, not preferences. She offered no further explanation. Mercer nodded, absorbing the response, and stepped aside to let her pass. Over the next days, the precinct operated under a heightened awareness that could not be ignored. Access levels shifted. Reports were cross-checked. Supervisors adjusted procedures in response to guidance that arrived without debate. Naomi remained present but unobtrusive, attending sessions, verifying documentation, ensuring consistency. She thought about how often accountability was mistaken for punishment, when in reality it was a recalibration, a return to standards already agreed upon. Mercer felt the recalibration keenly. Tasks that once felt automatic now required confirmation. Decisions that once went unquestioned now invited review. He noticed how his words were weighed differently, how assumptions no longer carried the same authority. It was not humiliation that unsettled him, but clarity. Naomi completed her responsibilities with the same restraint that had defined her arrival. When her final checklists were submitted and acknowledgments received, she prepared to leave. The precinct would continue without her, guided by outcomes she would not manage directly. As she exited, the building appeared unchanged, the same doors, the same lights, the same mission statement on the wall. Yet the quiet certainty that once filled its halls had been replaced by something more durable. Systems had looked inward and responded. Outside, Naomi paused briefly, breathing in the open air, confident that the work would persist beyond her presence. She walked away without looking back, leaving behind not a confrontation, but a record, and the understanding that authority, when examined honestly, could be dismantled and rebuilt through process alone, without consent from those who have mistaken power for permanence. The confirmation arrived quietly, delivered through official channels rather than announcements, and it changed the tone of the precinct in ways no one could ignore. An internal memorandum circulated early that morning, its language formal and restrained, outlining the scope of findings now verified and the steps to follow. Naomi Carter read the notice from a distance, standing near the edge of the parking lot as officers gathered near the entrance, their conversation subdued, their expressions careful. The memorandum did not name individuals directly, but it identified patterns, failures of oversight, and deviations from protocol that could no longer be dismissed as isolated. Inside, Officer Daniel Mercer read the same notice at his desk, his eyes lingering on phrases that described conduct he had once considered routine. The words were measured, impartial, and unmistakably final. He realized then that this was no longer an inquiry seeking clarification. It was a determination grounded in documented evidence. Meetings were scheduled with precise start times, calendars filling with mandatory sessions that left little room for interpretation. Supervisors adjusted assignments, temporarily restructured units, and issued instructions that carried a weight Mercer had not felt before. Naomi entered the building briefly that afternoon to complete. Final confirmations, greeted now with a professionalism that bordered on caution. She noticed how her presence no longer blended into the background. Eyes followed her, not with hostility, but with awareness. She was escorted to an office where senior administrators reviewed summaries projected onto a screen, each slide outlining conclusions reached independently of her testimony. Naomi contributed only to ensure accuracy, confirming that records aligned with verified data. She did not embellish or editorialize. The facts were sufficient. As the session concluded, a directive was issued to dissolve the existing unit structure pending reorganization, effective immediately. The decision was administrative, procedural, and irreversible. Mercer learned of it moments later, the notification appearing on his terminal without preamble. He stared at the screen, the finality of the message settling in. This was not a reprimand delivered face-to-face. It was the dismantling of a framework he had assumed was permanent. Around him, colleagues absorbed the news in silence, some stunned, others resigned. Naomi stepped into the hallway as the administrators dispersed, her role officially concluded. She passed Mercer once more, their paths crossing in the narrow corridor. He looked at her, searching for anger or satisfaction, and found neither. Her expression remained composed, her focus forward. In that moment, Mercer understood what he had missed from the beginning. Power did not always announce itself. It often waited, observed, and acted through systems designed to outlast individual will. Naomi exited the building for the final time, the doors closing softly behind her. The precinct continued to operate, but its foundation had shifted. Units were reassigned, leadership reevaluated, procedures rewritten. No raised voices marked the change. No spectacle accompanied it. Accountability had arrived through documentation, review, and the quiet authority of standards enforced without exception. Mercer gathered his belongings later that day, placing them into a box provided by administration, the measure of his career reduced to items that fit within it. He reflected on the assumptions he had carried, the ease with which he had mistaken permission for permanence. Outside, the city moved on, traffic flowing at familiar speeds, distances measured in blocks and miles unchanged. Naomi drove away without ceremony, confident that the outcome would stand on its own. She did not view the dismantling of the unit as a victory, but as a correction long overdue. The process had not required consent, confrontation, or force. It had required only access, patience, and the resolve to let systems speak where voices once dominated. In that quiet resolution, the meaning of authority was redefined, not by who held it, but by how it was held to account. In the weeks that followed, the absence of the unit became more noticeable than its presence ever had. The precinct continued its daily operations, but without the familiar shortcuts and unspoken permissions that once defined its rhythm. New protocols were introduced, reviewed line by line, and enforced without exception. Naomi Carter monitored the implementation remotely. Her involvement reduced to periodic confirmations that systems were responding as intended. She reviewed compliance reports from an office miles away, noting improvements that arrived gradually rather than dramatically. For her, this phase was about sustainability, ensuring that correction did not fade once attention shifted elsewhere. Officer Daniel Mercer experienced the change from a different vantage point. Without the structure he had relied on, he found himself navigating a narrower path, one defined by explicit rules rather than assumptions. Meetings replaced patrols, and documentation replaced discretion. He attended required sessions that emphasized accountability and impartiality. Listening as concepts he once dismissed as abstract were presented as non-negotiable standards. Mercer found no one raising their voice at him, no one assigning blame directly. Instead, there was a persistent expectation of adherence, a quiet insistence that outcomes now mattered more than intentions. He noticed colleagues adapting at different speeds, some embracing the clarity, others struggling with a loss of familiarity. The precinct itself felt more deliberate, its pace measured, its decisions slower but more transparent. Naomi visited once more to finalize a post-implementation review, entering the building without escort and moving through halls that now recognized her presence without question. She observed subtle changes in posture and tone, officers addressing her with respect that felt less performative and more cautious. In a brief meeting with leadership, she confirmed that corrective measures were functioning and that oversight would transition to a maintenance phase. There was no ceremony marking the conclusion. The work simply progressed to its next stage. Mercer saw her again in passing, this time nodding in acknowledgement without resentment. He understood now that her role had never been personal. It had been structural. Outside the precinct, community feedback began to reflect the internal changes. Complaints were addressed more promptly. Reviews included voices previously overlooked. Trust did not return overnight, but it began to rebuild incrementally, measured in consistent actions rather than promises. Naomi tracked these indicators as part of a broader data set, aware that meaningful change often revealed itself quietly. She prepared her final report with the same restraint that had guided her throughout, summarizing outcomes without embellishment. The document concluded with recommendations rather than conclusions, emphasizing vigilance over complacency. When she submitted it, the acknowledgement was immediate and concise. Her assignment was officially closed. Mercer packed his locker for the last time later that month, transferring to a different role within the department, one with defined boundaries and limited discretion. The transition felt less like a punishment and more like a recalibration, an opportunity to reconsider what authority meant in practice. He reflected on how easily confidence had once insulated him from scrutiny, and how that insulation had dissolved under sustained review. Driving home along familiar roads measured in miles he had traveled countless times, Mercer recognized that the most significant change was internal. The assumptions he had carried no longer held. Naomi moved on to her next assignment without pause, her work continuing in spaces where systems required examination rather than confrontation. She did not carry the precinct with her as a story of triumph or loss, but as a reminder of what quiet oversight could accomplish when applied consistently. The dismantling of the unit had not been a spectacle. It had been a process, one built on access, documentation, and the refusal to accept silence as consent. In its wake, what remained was not chaos, but an adjusted framework capable of supporting accountability beyond individual presence. For Naomi, that outcome mattered more than recognition. For Mercer, it marked the end of one understanding of power and the beginning of another. The city continued forward, unchanged in appearance yet altered in operation, carrying within it the subtle but enduring impact of a system forced, at last, to answer to itself. The story did not end with headlines or speeches, but with a quiet continuity that carried forward into ordinary days. Months after the review concluded, the precinct functioned with a steadiness that felt earned rather than assumed. Procedures once treated as formalities were now followed with care, and decisions were documented with an awareness that records mattered beyond the moment. Naomi Carter observed this from afar, reviewing periodic summaries that confirmed what she had hoped to see. Compliance remained consistent, corrective measures sustained, and oversight embedded rather than imposed. She closed the final report with a sense of completion that came not from satisfaction, but from alignment. Her work was never meant to be visible. It was meant to last. Officer Daniel Mercer adjusted to his reassigned role gradually, learning to navigate a professional landscape defined by explicit boundaries. He found that clarity, though restrictive at first, brought a different kind of stability. Interactions became more deliberate. Assumptions were replaced with verification. He noticed how the absence of unchecked authority created space for reflection, how accountability encouraged restraint rather than resentment. Over time, the weight he had once carried lifted, replaced by an understanding that power did not diminish when examined. It evolved. Naomi moved on to new environments where systems awaited the same quiet scrutiny. She did not speak publicly about her work, nor did she seek recognition. Those who knew her role understood that effectiveness lay in discretion. She carried forward the lesson reinforced once again that justice did not always require confrontation. Often, it required patience, precision, and the willingness to let structures reveal themselves under review. The city continued its routine rhythms, traffic flowing along familiar routes measured in miles and minutes, neighborhoods adapting incrementally to changes that felt subtle yet significant. Trust rebuilt not through promises, but through consistency. Residents noticed responses that were more measured, processes that felt transparent. They did not know Naomi's name, nor did they need to. The impact of her presence remained woven into daily operations, indistinguishable from the institution itself. Mercer occasionally thought back to the moment in the lobby when certainty had guided his words. That memory no longer carried defensiveness, only clarity. He understood now that silence could carry authority, that consent was not always required for correction, and that accountability did not announce itself with force. It arrived through systems designed to endure beyond individuals. Naomi reflected on similar moments across her career, each reinforcing the same truth. When power was questioned honestly, it either adapted or dissolved. In this case, it had adapted, reshaped by oversight rather than erased by conflict. The dismantling of a unit had not weakened the institution. It had refined it. As time passed, the story receded into the background of professional memory, referenced occasionally in training materials or procedural reviews, stripped of drama and reduced to lessons learned. That was as it should be. Naomi closed her notebook on the final day of her assignment cycle, satisfied that the work had been completed without spectacle. She understood that justice, when effective, rarely needed applause. It needed integrity. Somewhere, a new review began. Another system entered a phase of quiet examination, and Naomi prepared to step into it with the same calm resolve. The events at the precinct remained a testament to a simple truth. When authority is measured against truth, it does not survive by volume or dominance. It survives by accountability. And when that accountability arrives through careful process rather than confrontation, it reshapes outcomes without asking permission. In that enduring silence, justice found its most lasting form.